HR breakfast. I'll just do the introductions. I'll keep them brief. The housekeeping. We're not expected to have any fire drills. We have one yesterday. If the fire alarm goes off, then straight out the door the way that you came in. Toilets, if you need them over by the lifts. Reminder if you need it to either turn off or turn down. Phones, questions, if we could keep them to the end, that would be great, just so that the speakers can get through all of the content. And I think that's probably it in terms of housekeeping. I'll hand you over to Mark Keating and Claire and James, who are your speakers for the morning.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Morning, everyone. So a bit of an avalanche today of new legislation, which is obviously in the pipeline. We've been talking about probably for the last 6 months. Some is imminent in terms of April changes, and some won't kind of start until January, but actually probably need to prepare for them to land. Claire, if you can move to April changes. So I'm just going to do a bit of a quick recap on what's coming in the next 3 weeks. We have talked about this in the last HR breakfast seminar in December. Probably the headline piece is the changes to the statutory sick pay. So they're going to be payable from day one of the sickness absence. So the government's going to remove the current 3-day waiting period. So that means probably more expense for UK businesses. They reckon it's probably going to cost UK businesses about 450 million per year, which is an extra £15 per head. So obviously you need to prepare for that. And they're going to remove the lower earnings limit as well, which was £125 per week. So more people will have access to SSP from day one. There's going to be a new calculation method as well. So it's going to be the lower of 80% of average weekly earnings, or the statutory rate, which is going to increase to £123.25 per week. In terms of planning for this, obviously check your contracts. You might need to update them if you refer to the fact that SSP will only be payable from day 4, sickness absence. Also any policies, so absence management, any incapacity policies, you'll just need to update them as well. And if you have the benefit of being a retainer client with Kuits, then we will be sending out those updated policies for you for the next few weeks. So we'll do the heavy lifting. The other thing as well, with the new method of calculation, you may need to reconfigure your payroll system just to capture the new rate. So again, just perhaps check that. Next one, Claire. Paternity leave and unpaid parental leave. So paternity leave at the moment, you need to have service of 26 weeks. So that's going to become a day 1 right from the 6th of April. Likewise, with unpaid parental leave, it's currently 52 weeks. That's going to be a day 1 right as well. Again, update your policies on that. Also make sure your managers are aware of the new provisions around that. Also a change to the collective redundancy protective award payments. So collective consultation will be triggered when an employer is proposing to dismiss 20 or more employees in one establishment within a period of 90 days. Employer will need to comply with the strict legislative requirements around collective consultation with reps. If you fail to do that, as it stands at the moment, the penalty or the compensation for the employees is up to 90 days gross pay. So if you like, a quarter of your payroll costs for those employees, that's going to double on the 6th of April. And that's really to deter employers from taking shortcuts when it comes to collective consultation on redundancies. Some changes to whistleblowing protections. I say changes, it's more including a specific protection for those who complain about or report acts of sexual harassment. As it stands at the moment, in terms of whistleblowing protection, claimants frame complaints of sexual harassment or reports of sexual harassment in relation to maybe a breach of a legal obligation, or where it's perhaps endangering the health and safety of an individual. That is potentially can qualify as a protected disclosure, and the complainant can get some protection in terms of dismissal and detriment. So it's now going to include specific protection for those who report sexual harassment. So that could be a witness to an act of sexual harassment. That could be a mere bystander that's offended by the act. So that's, you may find more whistleblowing claims as a result of this. Bereaved partners' paternity leave. New provision this, and again, worth updating your existing family-friendly policies to capture this. So this will apply to fathers and partners whose partner, which is like the child's mother or even the primary adopter, dies within the first year of the child's life, or the adoption. So the right it's an unpaid right. It's a day one right. It's up to 52 weeks leave if that's required. The only stipulation is that the employee needs to have the main responsibility for the child following the bereavement. But actually, I think it's a really positive move from the government to introduce this. The employee as well will have enhanced protection, similar to those on maternity leave, around the protection against detriment and dismissal, enhanced redundancy protection, and we'll be able to request keeping in touch days during that period as well. So again, make managers aware of the policy change, and again, update your policy. As I say, for retainer clients, we will be doing this for you. Finally, and not finally, but we're going to mention menopause guidance. Menopause guidance, now this is voluntary at the moment, so in April it's not a legal requirement, but in 2027 it will be a legal requirement. It will apply to large employers, so those employers with 250 employees or more. What it's designed to do, it's the government are asking large employers to develop and promote a menopause action plan to support, I guess, women's health in the workplace, and it's kind of building on some of the protections already in place under the Equality Act. So the government will open a portal in April, which will allow large employers to upload their action plan. And as part of that, employers are committed to at least one concrete measure, which could be developing policies. It could be modifying the working environment. So in terms of varying temperature control, it could be training managers, or it could be offering flexible working to anyone with menopause or perimenopause symptoms. So again, a really positive step. You might think, well, we're not a large employer, we don't need to do it. Actually, I think it's again a really positive thing that businesses can do to support women's health in the workplace, and particularly if you have any networks that are set up. Again, it's a good initiative to be involved in. Next one, Claire. Finally, trade union recognition process. I'm sure many businesses here have actually already got a trade union in place on site. The news is that the Labour government are obviously trying to push for trade unions to have a foothold or a footprint, certainly in the workplace. So this is designed to simplify the process. So the process is trade union recognition can come about via voluntary agreement between the parties, or an application to the Central Arbitration Committee to determine the application from the union. They're going to change the requirements in terms of the support. So at the moment, trade unions require support of at least 40% of the entire bargaining unit in a ballot. That's going to be replaced with just a simple majority. So it really is just making it a lot more easier and seamless for recognition to be accepted by the CAC. Also, membership thresholds will change. At the moment, it needs to be 10% of the membership within the proposed bargaining unit, and that's going to be lowered to as little as around 2%. We're just waiting on secondary legislation just to put that in place. So what it means is, I guess, you might be faced with perhaps growing popularity of unions. Your employees may want to have unions in place. I think that very much depends on your own appetite or your own kind of feelings towards trade unions. And I'll speak to some businesses, and actually they're quite receptive to trade union involvement because it helps with consultation with staff. Other businesses, particularly maybe smaller businesses, just are very reluctant to allow unions in the business and perhaps to disrupt the business. In terms of planning for this, I think a lot of businesses are looking at their engagement gap with staff. So actually, what is the level of engagement with your staff? Have you got a staff council? Have you got an employee forum? Is there a direct line to management? Now, if actually you don't have any of those things and you don't know about engagement, or you haven't got that kind of relationship with your staff, then that's something you might need to think about. Otherwise, I think where employees tend to join trade unions is where they feel that they don't have that channel to speak up. So that you might have some work to do in relation to that. Okay, that's it from me in terms of the April changes. We're now going to move to the autumn, and this is your bit, Claire, isn't it?
It is. So a bit further ahead, but time moves on quickly, doesn't it? We're already in March. How's that happened? So October changes. Probably the biggest one, the one that's going to impact most businesses, is the extension of time to bring a claim. So at the moment, most cases, effective date, usually termination, can be the date of discrimination, but that's going to go up to 6 months for dismissals from October. It's not going to impact on breach of contract claims for some reason. That will remain at 3 months. They've always been a little bit of an anomaly. And it's not going to impact on those types of claims where there is already a 6 month limitation period to issue your claim. So that's typically equal pay claims, claims for statutory redundancy payments as well. Obviously, this means that you're going to be waiting longer to find out if somebody's going to claim. Factor in as well, ACAS early conciliation has been extended to up to 12 weeks now. So already the employee has up to 12 weeks to notify ACAS. They'll then have up to 6 months to bring the claim. The tribunals are taking at least 2 months in most cases to actually process the claims from receipt. So quite quickly, you can see that for new claims or claims that may become claims for dismissals from October, it may be well into 2027, towards the end of 2027, before you even know that that claim has been made against you and it lands on the doorstep. So that's one to watch out for. Okay. There's also going to be changes to the duty to prevent sexual harassment. You may recall this came in October 2024, that positive obligation on employers to take steps to reduce the instances of sexual harassment in the workplace. That's been changed as from October to an obligation to take all reasonable steps. So that brings it in line with the employer's defence in discrimination claims, but obviously is going to be a little more onerous. The government have said they're going to consult on what those reasonable steps might look like. So that's going to be quite helpful in terms of giving you a bit of a checklist to look at. If you weren't here when Kevin and I talked about this duty, I think that recording is still on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to find it. But what you're looking at there is training, risk assessments, complaints registers, those sorts of things. It's going to vary depending on the nature of your business, the size of your organisation, but it's definitely going to ramp up that obligation on you. And there is the potential, if you failed to take those all reasonable steps, that any compensation awarded can be uplifted by up to 25% as well. Linked to that, there's going to be the reintroduction of third-party harassment. Now, some of you, depending on how long you've been in HR, may remember that when the Equality Act came in 2010, third-party harassment was a thing then. It was repealed by the Conservative government in October 2013, but it's been reintroduced. And this is going to apply to all the protected characteristics. It's not just sexual harassment, it's everything. And it's going to have effect where a third party harasses one of your employees in the course of their employment. So anything in and around the workplace, but of course in the course of employment can be much wider than your actual physical premises and the day-to-day work. It can be attending events such as this, conferences, all of those sorts of things. So again, it's all about making sure that you've got your risk assessments in place. And again, there's going to be that consultation on what the reasonable steps to prevent will do. And the onus on you is going to be to take all reasonable steps to prevent it. Again, what those reasonable steps are going to be very individual to your business and the risks that you identify. So the key is doing that risk assessment, working out where you think the problems may arise. Okay. So then for those of you who are in hospitality, hopefully you're already aware of the obligation to have in place a tipping policy that came in 2023. There's going to be some tweaks to this. So when the policy is up for renewal and review, there's going to be an obligation to make sure you consult with employee reps or trade union reps where you recognise a trade union. There's going to be the obligation to review the policy every 3 years, and the new duty to consult is 3 years from the first day of version 1 of the policy becoming available. So pretty much now in all reality. So it's a case of checking your tipping policy, key dating your date for having that consultation in place. Okay. There's also a whole raft of new trade union rights that are coming in. I don't think many people in this room are in that trade union recognition phase, so most of it isn't going to touch your business. The one that is going to affect every employer is the first one. So this is the obligation to inform employees of their right to join a trade union. That's going to have to come in a written statement that will have to be given at the same time as the Section 1 particulars. So probably the easiest solution to that is to update your Section 1 statements, your contracts of employment. Penalty is going to be very similar to failing to provide a Section 1 statement or not providing an accurate one. So 2 to 4 weeks pay if there's another successful claim. And we're expecting some regulations that are going to give a bit more detail around that. As I say, I'm not going to cover the other points. They're on the slide. If they affect your business, get in touch with one of us and we'll try and help. Okay. So collective redundancy consultation, Mark.
Yeah, we've kind of dropped this in at this point because it's an open consultation. It's open until the 21st of May. And what it's looking at are the triggers for the thresholds for collective redundancy. So the current rule, and by the way, the current rule will not be changed by this consultation. So the current rule, I touched on it earlier, where an employer is proposing to dismiss 20 or more employees in one establishment within a period of 90 days. The employer will need to collectively consult. So what the Employment Rights Act is going to do in 2027, this consultation's been opened now with a view of just moving towards that launch date, is to consider additional thresholds. And in some ways, it's a bit of a nod to what happened with, you remember the retailer Woolworths that collapsed in 2008, I think it was. And there were subsequent claims brought by employees who were employed in those stores. Those stores maybe had fewer than 20 employees. So those employees said, well, we're entitled to a protective award because you should have consulted with us on a collective basis. And it was established by the tribunals and courts that actually each individual store was a single unit, so it wasn't wasn't one establishment. So those stores that had fewer than 20 employees, there was no legal obligation to collectively consult with them. So this is designed to, I suppose, address that in what the government maybe sees as an imbalance with the thresholds. So it's due to be introduced in 2027. And in terms of the consultation paper, the government sets out 4 ideas in terms of how what this threshold will look like that will trigger collective redundancy consultation. Things like looking at a percentage of the total employee count is one option, but actually the government were quite quick to rule that out. So we've put on the slide the 2 preferred options. I think the likely one is to look at a single fixed number of proposed redundancies, which could be anywhere between, say, 250 employees and 1,000 employees. So by way of illustration on that, if a retailer is shutting, say, 50 stores in nationwide, and there are 5 employees in each store, that's 250. So my maths is correct on that, I hope. So under the current rules, there's no collective consultation because actually each establishment has fewer than 20 employees. But actually, if you if you bring that all together, and the combined number is 250, then that would trigger collective consultation based on this option. Okay. The other option which may consider is a tiered approach, again, just based on the size of the employer and the number of redundancies that are anticipated or proposed. In both options, the 90-day calculation period is retained. Okay, so as I say, consultation is open until the 21st of May 26. Actually, what we're finding is with these consultations is that they are useful, particularly if you're a business, if you're a large employer that's affected by these changes. It is worth contributing because we are seeing these consultation papers are so important in terms of shaping what the final legislation looks like. So well worth expressing an opinion on that. It's on the government website. I guess still a way to maybe circumnavigate these rules if you've got different legal entities on each site. Actually, that may be a way to get around it, but again, that may be a loophole that's closed off in the final regulations, the final legislation. So that's it from me. James.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to spend the next probably 10 minutes or so on what is probably one of the most significant changes in the Employment Rights Act, which is the reduction in the qualifying period for unfair dismissal claims from 2 years to 6 months. So as many of you will know, employees must have at least 2 years continuous service to bring a claim for ordinary unfair dismissal in the employment tribunal. And that 2-year qualifying period has been in place since April 2012. So obviously, as I'd expect, most employers have become used to assessing their risk around that. And many of you might recall before the last general election, the government committed in their manifesto to making this a day one right, removing the qualifying period entirely. And that was also in the Employment Rights Bill that was published in November. But in a surprise announcement in November, after much back and forth with the House of Lords, the government dropped the commitment for a day one right in favour of a 6-month qualifying period. And so this change will take effect from the 1st of January 2027, and it will apply to dismissals on or after that date. There's also an existing right to written reasons for a dismissal, and that's also subject to the 2-year qualifying period currently, but again, that will be reduced to 6 months as well. And Claire will come on to another major change in relation to the removal of the cap after. So in terms of the implications from this, so as you might expect, there are a number of implications from this. I think the first point really is that obviously the risk is much earlier in the employment relationship. new employees that you employ from the 1st of July of this year may potentially have the right not to be unfairly dismissed when this change comes into force in January. And that obviously includes employees who are serving notice. And you'll also need to factor in the 1 week statutory notice. So I think probably the best way to look at it is 5 months and 3 weeks. And obviously the types of dismissals that are going to be most affected really are your misconduct, capability, and your redundancy dismissals. But I think probably the most significant implication of this is the effect on probationary periods. So I would expect that in most of your organisations, your contracts include probationary periods of 3 or 6 months. But obviously, once this qualifying service requirement is in, the 6-month probation period becomes almost or effectively obsolete. So it's important to think about how you're going to be dealing with probation periods. Obviously, a 3-month period only gives a very short window in which to assess an employee's performance. So I think it's going to be a case of making sure that your probationary periods are properly structured and actively managed. I think some employers might think that maybe adopting a staged approach with review meetings at set intervals so that concerns can be addressed and documented early. And obviously, the evidence that you gather within that probationary period will become even more important. For example, if an employee is dismissed for capability shortly after the 6-month period, then that evidence will become very important. You should also note, obviously, that non-renewal of a fixed-term contract is a dismissal as well. So once an employee is on a fixed-term contract, has 6 months, and they obtain 6-month service, then you'll need to ensure that a fair reason for dismissal is provided, and also that a fair process is followed as well if the contract's not being renewed. So in terms of further implications, there has been some suggestion that maybe reducing the qualifying period along with the removal of the cap might reduce so-called creative or maybe more opportunistic claims. So, I mean, we're probably more sceptical on that, but obviously at the moment employees that have 2 years or less than 2 years service might include claims for discrimination or whistleblowing or any other automatically unfair dismissal, because those don't obviously require the 2-year qualifying service. And so some might argue if employees can bring an ordinary dismissal claim after 6 months and without a cap, then they might feel less inclined to bring those claims to inflate the value of their claims. But I think in reality, our view generally across the team and probably in the industry is that those other claims remain uncapped as they are. They also attract additional compensation through things like injury to feelings. So I think they're still likely to heavily feature in tribunal litigation, and I think given the existing backlog in the tribunal, I think the more likely outcome is that they'll just increase the pressure on the tribunal and the number of claims that we'll be seeing. So in terms of the implication on redundancies, the 2-year qualifying period for a statutory redundancy payment isn't changing. But clearly, employees that have 6 months service will now have the right not to be unfairly dismissed, and that includes redundancy situations. So when employers are carrying out, and when you're carrying out your redundancy processes, you'll just need to ensure that the process is fair and properly documented, and it will also be difficult to accelerate any redundancy process to keep employees below that 6-month period, particularly, as Mark said, if you're carrying out collective consultation and the mandatory consultation periods if you're carrying out redundancies of over 20. And then finally, in terms of TUPE, the implication in relation to this is employees assigned to a transferring business or service will normally transfer to the new employer on their existing terms and conditions and with their existing service. So by reducing the qualifying service periods to 6 months, obviously many more employees will have protection from unfair dismissal, and that will increase the potential liability for these businesses, particularly where there's ongoing disciplinary or capability concerns or any unresolved grievances. So any TUPE processes will need to bear that in mind in terms of their due diligence and any costings as well. So in terms of the practical takeaways from this change, I think the first point is obviously analysing your workforce now, understanding where your employees sit in terms of their service, addressing any concerns before December. Obviously, if there's any performance or conduct concerns, dealing with them potentially earlier than you may have wanted to, particularly where you have new employees joining from July as well. The next one is obviously reviewing your recruitment processes and pre-employment checks, which can be being done now. Obviously, the window for assessing performance is much shorter now. So I think getting the hiring decision right is becoming even more important. Reviewing your contracts, especially any clauses around probationary periods. Yeah, I mean, as I said, the importance of probation periods has taken a new level. So yeah, it's a case of reviewing those. And also ensuring that your probation periods are structured and properly documented, because as I said, they'll become increasingly important if, for example, an employee is dismissed just after that 6-month period for capability, for example. And the last one is an ongoing point, obviously reviewing and updating your policies. Many of your policies may have been drafted with the assumption that the first 2 years carries relatively limited unfair dismissal risk, but it's important to ensure that those policies still enable to carry out a fair and reasonable process when dealing with dismissals.
So over to me for the last section. The slide says there's no limit, or there will be from January anyway. So this is all about compensation for ordinary unfair dismissals, and it's only about the compensatory award. There's no change to the basic award, which everyone who's unfairly dismissed, other than in circumstances where they've been made redundant and have already had their statutory redundancy pay, will be entitled to the basic award. That's sort of your minimum that you're going to walk away with if you've been unfairly dismissed. And of course, the focus is a lot around the numbers, but bear in mind, this isn't giving people any additional rights in terms of unfair dismissal. It only applies if the person's been unfairly dismissed. That does remain in place, and I do think that's important. So at the moment, what we've got is 2 parts to the cap, and it's the lower of £118,233. That goes up every April. At the moment, we've not been told what the new limit for this April is going to be. So I don't know whether that is an indication that maybe they're not going to bother this year because the cap's coming away from January anyway. Don't know, may come out in the next couple of weeks. But it is the lower of that £118,233 or the equivalent of 52 weeks pay. So for the vast majority of employees, when you look at what average earnings are in the country, it's somewhere in the region of £30,000 to £35,000. I think the average income stats are. It's going to be capped at that sort of level for most people at the moment. But 1st of January, the cap is removed. And this is for dismissals where the effective date of termination is on or after the 1st of January 2027. It's not when the tribunal hearing takes place, because anyone who's got a case listed for hearing at the moment has probably got cases listed into next year. We certainly have, okay? So that's the key date. It's those people that are dismissed from the 1st of January 2027 onwards. Okay. So, really important, because I think we've sort of lost sight of this a little bit in a lot of the discussions about the cap going. What is happening is the cap's being removed. The rules on how you calculate the compensation that somebody's awarded if they've been unfairly dismissed are not changing. Okay. So, compensation can include, and the primary one, financial losses, so loss of earnings. Okay. principally, how long is it going to take somebody to find another job at or around the level of pay they were on at the time they were dismissed, okay? And that's what's going to remain key, how long it takes somebody to find another job. And that loss of income can be total loss, so if you're out of work for a period of time before you find another job, but it can also include the difference between what you were earning before you were unfairly dismissed and what you then go on to earn. Also covers things like pension losses, loss of other benefits, can include things like bonuses, share options, long-term incentive plans, other share schemes. That's always been the case. That's the case now. But what the cap has done is meant, in reality, most people, the tribunal is not even considering those things, because if you're earning that level of money where you've got lots of those benefits, or even if you're not, you're already going to hit your cap anyway. So it's sort of been a bit of a moot point, but that is going to become a lot more important going forward. And in addition, what the tribunal does, because all the calculations are based on net losses, but of course there'll be tax to pay when you get your compensation. So what the tribunal also has to do is gross up any award to take account of those income tax implications, so to effectively give the person what they would have had but for the unfair dismissal. And again, the cap's largely dealt with those problems up to now, but that's going to become much more significant once the cap goes, because for anyone who is on a 45% tax rate, the grossing up figure is 54%. So that's half the award, again, that you would have to pay for the employee to get the amount in their hand that they're entitled to. On top of that, of course, if you fail to comply with the ACAS Code of Practice, there's the potential again for an uplift of up to 25%. Again, for lots of claims, that's been a bit of a moot point because it would have taken the individual over the cap anyway. But now those sorts of things become more and more important. Oh, I'll just take myself back. But what isn't going is the tribunal's overall position, which is Section 123(1) of the Employment Rights Act 1996, which is what is just and equitable. So that there is that balancing. So hopefully that may act as a bit of a safety valve and avoid some really big awards being made, but it is going to become increasingly important. So what are the implications? As I've said, it's for the dismissals that are effective on or after the 1st of January. So that's going to include anyone who's serving notice at that point. So you may be wanting to take some strategic decisions on whether people are going to be paid in lieu, and you'll take the hit on the cash flow for that in the short term. It just means that potentially any dismissal could become more expensive, but only if it's unfair. And that's really important to bear in mind. It raises the stakes, doesn't it? But we are still just talking about financial losses for unfair dismissals. The rules haven't changed. But what we might see is more claims around career losses, because with the cap going, people who struggle to find alternative employment quickly, or who can say, well, I was on this trajectory up until the point at which you unfairly dismissed me, and now it's set me back a few years. We may start to see more and more of those types of claims around that career type loss, and generally damage to earnings over longer periods. Probably the biggest impact is potentially the wider range of employees who are likely to claim. At the moment, you don't tend to see many higher earners in the employment tribunal because of the cap. It just doesn't become a really lucrative, viable, however you want to put it, option for them, because they're always thinking, well, actually, I'm either going to have lost more than that, or it's just not worth it at my level. There's a lot of talk. I don't know whether it's just in the legal world or whether it's seeped outwards, that there's going to be loads of football managers and football players all of a sudden in the employment tribunal asserting that they've been unfairly dismissed. Some may do, but for the vast majority of business, what we're talking about is your high earners, the people who are earning above the cap, so senior executives. So I don't want to judge what anyone might do at the moment. I've certainly had conversations with clients when they've been looking to dismiss high earners, where we've effectively said, look, why don't you just offer them the notice period and the cap? They can't get any more than that. Let's settle at that level and we all walk away. That's fine at the moment when you've got the cap. But once the cap's gone, those sorts of conversations are much harder to have. We may also see an impact on older employees. They may become more likely to claim where they find it harder to secure alternative employment, particularly at their level. They may also have significant pension loss claims as well. And of course, nobody's having conversations with people about when are you going to retire because of the risk of age discrimination claims. So trying to say, well, look, Fred may say he was going to retire at the age of 75, but actually we've been having conversations for years where he made it clear he was going to go at 65. You're not going to have that evidence. So it'll be very difficult to challenge that claim where Fred says, actually, if you'd not unfairly dismissed me, I would have stayed and I wouldn't have retired until I was 75. Okay. Disabled employees as well. Not every dismissal of a disabled person is disability discrimination, but disabled employees, people with health conditions that make it difficult for them to find alternative work, may then start to bring ordinary unfair dismissal claims as well, because they may have significant losses of income and they're not going to be subject to the cap. The value of those claims could be significant. So you imagine a redundancy situation. A disabled employee is selected for redundancy. The selection isn't discriminatory, but it's otherwise unfair. The value of their claim may be much higher than the value of a claim of another employee who finds it easier to secure an alternative role. So what it does is it raises the risks, the stakes go up. And of course, from your perspective, it's harder to kind of work out, well, what might our exposure be if we take this course of action when you're advising the business. Okay. So do we think we'll see fewer discrimination, whistleblowing claims, those automatic unfairs? Possibly. But if you bring in a claim, you might as well add them in, hadn't you? So I'm not convinced that it's actually going to have that impact. It may do over the longer term, but those people, like James mentioned earlier, who are trying to get around limitation periods, other jurisdictional issues, may just bring all of the claims and see which ones stick. We'll just have to see. I think in reality, the reduction in the length of service to bring a claim down to 6 months probably going to have a bit more of an impact than the removal of the cap. You might want to have a think about your post-termination restrictions, particularly your non-compete clauses, particularly for more senior people. And you might need to do a bit of a trade-off of what's the greater risk to the business, them going and joining a competitor. We'd want to prevent that. We've got current clauses that stop that. Or we prevent them joining the competitor, then they hire. So there's going to be that trade-off. And you'll have to seriously think about, well, actually, is a non-compete the right route to go down? It may become a point of negotiation. You may think, actually, maybe we can have better clauses around our confidential information or non-solicitation, non-dealing of customers, those sorts of things. Are we going to see an increase in settlements or the value of settlements? Probably. The stakes go up, the negotiation potentially becomes harder. But what you might see instead is there's a greater incentive to litigate from both parties, because actually you're not going to be able to say, well, the most you can get from that claim is X, therefore we'll offer you a little bit lower than that and you'll save all your costs, because now you've not got the X, the cap will have gone. So potentially, and if you were lucky enough to be here in December, you might recall Kevin and Lauren talking about the impact of AI, which is going to tell everyone that there's no limit on what they can claim in compensation. And that's already fueling and inflating some expectations. So it's only going to continue as well. What is going to happen, I think, is remedy is going to become a really key battleground in any litigation. Effectively, what is the claim worth? Employees are going to have a duty to mitigate their loss. Removal of the cap doesn't allow people to just rest on their laurels and not try and go out and find alternative employment. That isn't changing, but the evidence of the attempts are going to become more and more important. And that's from both parties. You may say, actually, this person should have been able to find another job within a month, and here's the list of all of the vacancies that would be suitable for them and the salaries in their location. Gathering that evidence and making sure that you have it is going to be really important. What we might see is a growth in the use of experts in this area. There might be a business model there for somebody who can go and say, well, I'm the expert on telling the tribunal when a person should have found another job or not. Okay. So what will that lead to? Longer hearings, because we're going to be arguing a lot more about mitigation, about the remedy. There's certainly going to be more documents all around what efforts somebody has taken to find alternative employment. We'll also see more arguments around the Polkey reduction. So Polkey was a case, in effect, where it was found that, well, it was unfair to dismiss now, but you would have been able to fairly dismiss effectively within a short period of time. We'll see a lot more of those arguments being run. There's no change to that. You'll also see more arguments around contributory fault. So where the individual may say, well, I might have done something, but it wasn't as bad as the thing you said that I'd done. So the evidence around that is going to be really important. And that can result in a reduction in the level of compensation awarded as well. Tribunal has already got a backlog. As I said earlier, we've got lots of cases already listed into 2027. We know some regions are already listing in to 2028. And of course, not only have we got the removal of the cap, the longer length of hearings, we've also potentially got more claimants, because you're only going to need 6 months qualifying service to bring the unfair dismissal claim. Tribunals are recruiting at the moment, but you know that takes time. There's normally about a 6 to 12 month lead in on judicial recruitment. There has also been some speculation that we may see a return of employment tribunal fees. It's very speculative at this point in time, and whether that actually has any impact, only time would tell. To give you an idea, the last published statistics, and they're a bit behind with the tribunal stats, in December, they were saying for Q2 of 2025, so that's the July to September period, the volume of claims was up 33% at that point in time already. Okay, and what we may then see is an increase in insolvencies, with companies just not able to pay the potentially increased awards made against them. Already there is a significant portion of claimants that never recover the awards of compensation that are made against them. Okay, so just before I come to the action point, so just a bit of a recap. Yes, the cap is being removed. Yes, it's from the 1st of January, but it's not changing the rules, and it's only going to apply if people have been unfairly dismissed. So big change, principles are staying the same, For the vast majority of employees, it's probably not going to hugely impact what their compensation figure may be, but particularly for higher earners, disabled employees, older workers, those who struggle to find another role, yes, the amount may go up. And what it does mean is there's going to be a level of uncertainty. You're not going to have that comfort of saying to the business, look, our maximum exposure is, whether it's the 118,233 or the 52 weeks pay. Okay. So what do you need to be doing? Education. Talk to decision makers in the business, directors, managers who are carrying out disciplinary processes. Make sure they're trained to do that. Shameless plug, we have a great training programme on investigations, disciplinaries and appeals. Those basic things that are going to make the difference between whether somebody has been fairly dismissed or unfairly dismissed. It's going to improve your chances of getting over that threshold, absolutely. And it's well worth that investment in making sure that people understand what the implications of the changes may be. Might just rein in a few people that perhaps you know in your business may be a little bit more gung-ho when it comes to making decisions, often for the right reasons, but still where you know actually it may be unfair, but we can price in what the risk may be. Those sorts of decisions become a little trickier after January. And linked to that, you want to do an early calculation of what your risk is likely to look at, ideally before a dismissal takes effect. So you might start thinking about, well, what do I reasonably think the prospects of this person finding another role are? What does the job market look like in terms of what skills they have, where I know they're located? You might want to have a think about what can you do to help them. So in redundancy programs, for example, you might start to offer some coaching, outplacement support, all those things that might make it easier for somebody who is dismissed and may think about bringing a claim to find it easier to secure the alternative role. Effectively, anything that you can do to make them more employable, which I appreciate if you've dismissed somebody for gross misconduct, might not be high on your list of things that you want to do, but it might just save the business a little bit of money. Early action and intervention links very much in with what James was saying about 6 months and probationary periods. If you know you've got people who could be problematic, likely to bring claims that are perhaps on your list of people that you don't think has a significant future within your business, there's a window of time before the cat's removed to take whatever action you think is appropriate for them. Also, that involves tackling issues early on. We always tell you you should be doing that anyway, but the reality is you're busy with your day-to-day jobs. Managers often find it difficult to performance manage in particular, and I can see a few nods around the room on that one. But if you can manage to deal with issues quickly before it becomes a problem, before you get into dismissal territory, that might just prevent some risk to the business. Evidence and audit trails. It was always going to come up, wasn't it? We're lawyers. We love paper, whether it's physical or digital. You need all those records. It's going to become really important to show, actually, these are all the steps we took, so that dismissal is fair. It's going to be even more critical. But also that evidence and audit trail around, well, mitigation. What do we know about vacancies for this person? What support did we offer to them, and can we offer them to try and find alternative employment? All of that evidence is, and retaining the evidence, particularly when you bear in mind, as I said, when talking about the October changes, that it may be some period of time before you know that the claim has been made against you. Really important to retain that and make sure that you've got it in the event that a claim is brought. And there we go. That's the end. And what I will say is, there's never been a better time to sign up to our retainer, has there? With all these changes. Okay.